Hi there, I'm April Callis-Birchmeier, and I'm here for another LinkedIn Live to talk about change communication tips. One of the biggest pieces of any change management effort is communication. And I feel that many times we take communication a little bit for granted, particularly some of my project sponsors, I have to say, feel like because we are thinking and talking about this project or this change all the time, there's a sense sometimes with the project team, with leadership and our sponsors, that everybody's talking and thinking about this change all the time. And yet, nothing could be further from the truth. People are really thinking and talking about the things that they're working on, not necessarily the change that we're aware of is coming their way. So I think it's really a critical piece to spend a little time today talking about some communication tips for you to be able to communicate about change in the best way possible, which is in advance. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of coming into your workplace or turning on your laptop only to find that there was some sort of major update or upgrade over the weekend and nobody had mentioned it to you. You might have an 8:30 meeting, but you can't log into your Microsoft account to get on Teams, or your Zoom needs to be updated somehow. And there's nothing more aggravating than not knowing that's about to happen. And yet, I would run into that all the time when I was working for a number of clients, including a state client. The IT team really felt that the upgrade was very minimal, so they didn't really see the need to communicate it to everyone. And yet, when I was coming in early to set up a meeting and could not log into my system, I was pretty frustrated. And I'm sure all of you have been there at some point in time too. So, we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about communicating change in general, how critically important that is, and some of the best practices to ensure that we're communicating in a way that others can understand. Then we'll talk a little bit about tools and methods for communicating. We'll talk about how to develop these tools and what to do when you are somewhat blocked in your communication efforts. And also, we'll talk about communication plans. So, hopefully, that's what you need to hear today because that's what I'm going to share. So, let me just start out by talking a little bit about communicating change. Now, if you have been connected to me, you are aware of the READY framework. The READY framework, the middle piece, the glue, if you will, is advanced communication. Advanced communication means in advance of the change and in enough time and with enough clarity that those who are going to be impacted by this change can recognize it and understand it and will be able to adapt to it. So that's what we're talking about when we're speaking about how important it is to do advanced communication, to send this communication out soon, early in the process. Now, I have to tell you, I've been blocked sometimes or postponed in communicating about change by leaders who feel that we're not quite where we need to be in terms of project planning. We don't know everything that we need to know to be able to communicate every detail about the change, and so we should wait. But I have found in most cases that is a really terrible strategy because time moves very quickly. And in the most recent Gallup poll, Gallup had identified that people need to hear about change 9 to 16 times before they sometimes recognize that it matters to them or that they're impacted or that this is an important issue. And that's a lot of repetition, if you will. In the past, we used to say 7 times. Tell everybody something 7 times and they'll hear it, they'll remember it. But now we're up to 9 to 16 times. And if you need to communicate 9 to 16 times, you need a bit of a runway. You can't communicate 9 to 16 times in 1 week. Well, you can, but nobody will listen to you at that point. They'll just start deleting your emails as soon as they see them. So we want to communicate over time not all at once. And we want to ensure that we have at least 9 to 16 repetitions of our communication. There's also that sense of wanting perfection. Many times our leaders want our change message to be perfect and to have all of the details included in it to ensure that everybody has everything they need all in one moment. And that's just not actually feasible, because we will discover many, many items in our project work as we're moving forward on our change initiative. There will be a lot of different opportunities. There will be a lot of information discovered and sort of determined during our project work. And so we won't know everything right at the beginning of a project. But we can share what we do know. We can say, this is starting, and here's our target date. Maybe it's a very fluid target date. We can say we're hoping to complete this in a year, but we could go up to 18 months rather than giving a date like July 2nd. So we want to ensure that we're giving enough information, enough detail, that people have a little heads up and they might think, oh, I've heard of that, the next time they hear about our change. And we also want to talk about it in a very relevant, relatable way, with a story or an example or some sort of anecdote that helps people relate to the change, that helps people understand what this change is about. Many times I talk about the discovery I made when I started talking with stakeholders about change. And we tried to approach them in a very technical way, describing databases and the benefits of databases that were ERP databases versus individual departmental databases. And it was very difficult to capture attention and help people understand what we were talking about. But when I started talking with them about the difference between running to multiple stores on a Saturday afternoon to do errands versus going to a super center of some sort to do errands and being able to complete everything in one place. And then I related that to the way that they were currently working. They were running to multiple stores. But in our ERP future state, they would go to a super center and have everything they needed in one place. When I was able to make that link for them, everybody said, oh, we want that. That's exactly what we're after. And they were on board. Whereas we had really struggled when we were simply showing images, no less, of databases. So communicating change has to be done frequently in advance of the change. We have to tell people what we know when we know it. And then we want to think about, how do we communicate? You know, the old model that I learned in school about communication, you have your sender and your receiver. You have your message moving from the sender to the receiver. You have feedback from the receiver to the sender. And in between, you have noise. And that noise represents a number of things: perceptions, lack of understanding. It could be physical noise. It could be mental noise. There's a lot that can interfere with communication. And so ensuring that we're getting the message to be sent from the receiver to the sender, and that the sender grasps the message and can communicate back to the receiver, to the sender, that they've heard it. That's a really, really important piece of communication. And when we are asking for feedback, we're not asking because we want to know, did I do a good job? We're asking for feedback around communication because we want to know what was heard and understood. We want to see if there's noise interfering with that message. So it's important to build that feedback loop so that we know exactly what was understood. Then when we're thinking about communicating, we have a number of different tools that we can use. We can use written communication, such as emails or articles or announcements, FAQs, flyers, handbooks, you name it. We can write it, right? And I think ensuring that our writing is accessible and easily understood, that we're not using a lot of acronyms, which is what we tend to do when we're communicating about projects or change, that we're not using acronyms, that we are spelling everything out and talking about what will actually occur for our end users, for our stakeholders. How will this change impact them? What will they see? What will they feel? How will they perform in their role? That's what people want to know. And then we also have a lot of verbal communication opportunities. We could do town hall meetings, we can have presentations, just a small group meeting, videos, training. There's endless amounts of verbal communication that we can do, and also social media, things like that, where we're ensuring that we're setting up maybe a communication campaign that's going on for 16 weeks or so, or maybe 10 weeks, so that everybody's aware that this communication is coming. And when we think about communication tools and creating communication, I think it's also an important piece to recognize that sometimes we don't always have a lot of control over how the communication is disseminated. So many times, if you're in an organization, you might be that person that's able to send out emails and announcements, that's able to really provide written and verbal and social media communication, which is kind of a combination of both, to all of our stakeholder groups. You might also recognize that there are other groups in your organization that can be helpful to you. So I'm not the only person who can send things out in my organization. I can also send out to all of the department leaders in the organization and ask them to share that communication with their particular groups, audiences, and their stakeholders. And I think also it's important to realize that when we're thinking about how we communicate out, in a lot of large organizations, there's a very rigorous communication governance process. And that means that somebody has the communication king title. Somebody is really the person that is supposed to be sending out communication and has access to send out communication on behalf of other leaders in the organization. And when we have that communication governance process and somebody has directed you, I've been directed to use the communication governance process, it's incredibly important to do so. When somebody has mentioned to you that nothing can be sent directly from you, that it has to go through this governance process and they will send it forward, it can be a little frustrating, honestly. You may have to back up your planning schedule. So instead of something being developed by July 1st, you maybe have to develop it by June 15th, June 14th, so that you are able to add in the time that communication governance team needs to look at that information before they send it out. So you may have to bake in a number of weeks into your schedule and to your draft schedule to ensure that the communication governance has time to review and then has time to deliver that communication out to the stakeholder groups that they're responsible for. So don't feel frustrated if you get into that situation where you have to use a communication governance group. Sometimes they will start to trust you after you've used them for, religiously. If you've rigorously accepted and followed their process, they will start to maybe loosen the reins a bit, maybe be a little bit more responsive, or a little bit, or providing some coaching to you about how to ensure that things sound the way that they want them to sound. And also, I think that when you realize that you're part of a team, you're part of this communication team, you can really start to relax into this sense of security that nothing will be communicated out that hasn't been approved by governance. And so therefore, it gives you this great ability to kind of relax and know that you have partners and teammates who are there to make sure that communication sounds good, looks good and is going to the correct stakeholders. I think also when we recognize that we are in a communication governance process, we can ask that group to ensure that they give us feedback and ideas on how best to communicate. For example, I was working on a very large project. We had 10 million stakeholders, and we had actually about 1.3 million active stakeholders who were going to be end users, if you will. So they were going to be directly receiving the benefits of this project. And I was quite nervous about how to communicate to that many stakeholder groups. And fortunately, I was working in a communication governance process where there was a communications team, an overall corporate team that was approving communication and sending that communication. So my job was to make the communication as fantastically great as it could be, so that hopefully it would move more quickly and they wouldn't have to change a lot of my my wording or images or something. And then I packaged everything together in a way that made it simple for the governance committee to simply look at all that communication for a particular stakeholder group, approve it, and send it. And then they had relationships with all of these other agencies and external stakeholder groups that we needed to have their help to be able to share information. And they had this relationship already in place. And so they were able to very quickly communicate out to all of the stakeholder groups through these associations and external stakeholders. And then they, each agency, each external stakeholder group leader took responsibility and sent that communication forward to their stakeholders. So it was a very, very effective process. And I was initially reticent to follow along. I was a little bit frustrated. I couldn't send things out directly, but I discovered the great relationships that they had and their ability to disseminate messaging to all of the key messages, as well as all of those minor stakeholder groups who maybe were external but still needed to have something. They did a terrific job of disseminating the information out to everyone. So that was fantastic. One of the biggest pieces for our change management plan when we're working on a change initiative on a large project of some sort is the fact that we need a robust communication plan. We have to have a communication plan, or we cannot really figure out how to communicate. We may miss things. So when I'm looking at building my communication plan, I'm starting out by really reflecting the strategy that I have around communication in the plan. So I definitely talk about my approach to communication and why we're doing things in the way that we're doing them in the communication plan. Then I want to really call out the target audiences. Here's the target audiences that we're really focusing on. Many times these are the stakeholder groups that are most impacted, such as end users, and also those who are going to have a direct downstream impact from this change. So I call out my target audiences and I estimate how many folks are in those target audiences and how I can best reach them. Then I want to identify what are key messages that we are going to be sending about this change initiative. And you can have 10 key messages that you keep sort of riffing off of, keep repeating these key messages, but in different ways. You can also have 30 or 40 key messages, but knowing the key messages is very important for you for the communication plan, because if you don't have a sense of what the key messages are, you will get bogged down trying to discover, like, what do we need to communicate now? Where do we need to communicate now? Sometimes a key message can be like, maybe every Thursday you have a progress update. Maybe you have key messages around benefits for different stakeholder groups. You have key messages around how soon this change will come to different stakeholder groups. whatever your key messaging is, if you take the time to really focus on that when you're building your communication plan, it will make things simpler later when you're under a lot of stress, under deadlines. Everything's moving quickly in the execution phase, and you're thinking, oh gosh, what do we need to send a message about? We have it all figured out. And then you're going to build out your tools. So I always start with my frequently asked questions, my FAQ, my FAQ document. I always start there because I find that when I start with the frequently asked questions, and I'll just generate 5 or 10 questions from the top of my head, and then I'll go ask people, what's the answer to this question? And in that conversation that I have with leadership and with our technical teams and with our project leaders, in those conversations, more questions come up. And I capture those, and then I try to get answers to those questions. The fact is just incredibly important. It's the first piece of communication you really need to focus on. And I always put mine on a website. I always start to build it and to create a web presence for it so that end users or stakeholders or business owners, sponsors and leaders can all find that document and read it so that when a question comes up, it's written in black and white on that website that what the answer is for that particular question. And developing that document, that tool, as I said, that's my first step. I think it is the best first step, honestly, because it gives you leverage to go get answers and to figure out what's happening, what's going on. And then I think about, do I need to create, so a website is a communication tool as well. I'm putting that FAQ document on a website. Then I want to create some sort of video with that. Maybe it's a video of the leader of the change talking about why we're doing this. You can add the transcript from the video, add text copy on there. I also like to ensure that I'm doing some sort of handbook or flyer, something that's paper. People still like paper, even though most of us are using digital tools all the time. There is still a need for paper. And so I recommend that you still create paper documentation about this change, as well as digital documentation about the change. And then we know we have to get out there and start to verbally communicate the change. So those webinars, town hall meetings, tutorials, whatever it is that you can verbally share and share on video is terrific for your change effort, because then you're really able to sometimes even demo how this change will really impact others. I like to also then create, so I'm identifying in my change management plan, the communication plan portion, I'm identifying the tools that I plan to use and which stakeholder groups I'm developing these tools for. So I make a communication matrix. I put all my stakeholders on the left-hand column, and then I fill in all the tools that I plan to create, and then I just put a tick mark for each stakeholder group for that tool, if that's a tool that I'm going to share with them. It's just a helpful way to keep track of all of your stakeholders and the tools that you're creating. And then you can even dive down a few layers and start to build out your schedule in terms of when you're going to draft and who needs to review it, who needs to approve it, when this will finally be completed, and when it goes to communication governance or when you send it out. I think also it's helpful if you calendar all of the communication efforts. So I like to have a specific calendar just for communication. I use Excel for my calendar. I just put in every single date from the beginning of the project to the end of that project, to our tentative end. And I focus on ensuring that I've got all of my communications scheduled, because that way I'm able to just relax. I look at the date, July 2nd, I am sending out an announcement to this stakeholder group that they will be changing systems in 18 months. And that's what I'm supposed to be doing that day. It's just a terrific way to kind of take it off of remembering and thinking about it and actually automate it so that every single day you know what communication's moving forward. And that also enables you to be able to focus on kind of that ad hoc emergency communication pieces that come up. Maybe the technical team has discovered something won't work and they have to figure out a workaround. Maybe there's some sort of need for volunteers to help review something. And all of that ad hoc communication must go out, but it can fit easily into this calendar. The fact that you already have your planned communication, on the calendar gives you the ability to flex and to be able to send out ad hoc communication to those stakeholder groups who may need it. So I think that having a robust communication plan that really helps you to share with leadership, with others, with your project team, how you're going to communicate to stakeholders and end users about this change initiative is just so important so that everybody gets on the same page, they can understand what's happening. And also so that we can have discussions with leadership about whether or not our approach is the way to go, or if there's something else they'd like to do. And then I really think that it's important to also think very creatively about communication tools. I have at times used Zoom interviews that were 5 minutes long to share information to stakeholders in an email. I've created the Zoom and then I linked the Zoom in the email and have sent that out. I've created a lot of different types of activities and also some job aid type activities. And I'll have to tell you, the most creative communication that I think I ever saw in my life was on a large statewide program. One of the state regions was working with stakeholders to help them adopt this new change, this new program that we were implementing. And they decided it would be fun if they could create temporary tattoos that had the logo of the program on it. And at that time, they were enrolling people in person. So they gave each person who enrolled in the new program a temporary tattoo of the logo, and the navigators themselves had temporary tattoos on their hands, on their cheeks, everywhere you could put them. They were really funny. I just thought the temporary tattoo was a very creative way to communicate, and you can think of creative ways to communicate as well. So if you'd like to learn more about communicating effectively, communicating in advance, and communicating in a way that helps those stakeholders prepare for change and prepare in a way that they can adopt that change more quickly, more easily, so that we can actually start to realize the benefits of the change, join us for our training. We have training starting on September 23rd. I'm very excited. Our Ready, Set, Change accelerated training and exam prep cohort begins the 23rd. We've already sold a third of our seats. So if you are interested in learning a terrific process to lead change, if you're interested in knowing what goes into a change management plan, how to write your communication plan, or if you're interested in earning the Certified Change Management Professional certification, please come join us September 23rd to October 11th. And we work on in the evenings, 4 to 6 p.m. EST on Monday, Thursday, then Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. And we also have video training as well. So I want to assure you that if you're looking to earn your CCMP, if you're looking to learn more about how to best help your stakeholders, your organization move through change, this is the place to be. So I hope that you reach out to me if you have any questions, because I'd love to share this with you. It's our last cohort for 2024. But thank you so much for joining me today. And my hope is that you've taken away some tips on how to better communicate about change and some ideas that you can incorporate into your communication plan and ideas that you can share with your stakeholders to ensure that everybody is aware and is really ready to adopt change.